Good afternoon. It's Friday the 21st of January 2022, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio today, Patrick Henningsen from 21st Century Wire. Welcome to the program, Patrick.
Great to be with you, Mike.
And we're going to get straight on with, Russia, Ukraine. It's starting to really kick off.
Yeah, the war drums are beating pretty hard if you're paying attention to what the media is trying to make us believe right now.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if that's what people want, but that's definitely what the media and the establishment are pushing right now. So Joe Biden gave his first press conference in, I think, a year, first proper press conference. So it's a 1-year anniversary from his inauguration. So he's 1 year into his first term here. And so I guess it's going to be if you do 4 years of this president, one press conference per year.
Yeah, that's about right, isn't it?
That's the clip. So he kind of mumbled and stumbled his way through it. There were some softball questions, but they weren't concerned about the U.S. southern border. The press, everyone wanted to know about Ukraine and Russia's border.
Right.
That was the bulk of, I think, the questions, definitely on foreign policy. Are you going to stop Putin from invading Ukraine? So this is what most of it was. Let's take a look at some of these questions. So this is the first one. Now, is the U.S. going to intervene? Is NATO going to intervene? They're certainly making noises like they're going to, quote, support Ukraine should the Russians invade. Are the Russians even going to invade? We'll get into that in a minute and give you some answers. Let's go ahead and listen to this first bit from the press conference, and we'll break this down for everybody.
David, I'm not so sure he is certain what he's going to do. My guess is he will move in. He has to do something. And by the way, I've indicated to him the two things he said to me that he wants guarantees on. One is Ukraine will never be part of NATO. And two, that NATO or there will not be strategic weapons stationed in Ukraine. Well, we can work out something on the second piece, pretending what he does along the Russian line as well, the Russian border in the European area of Russia. On the first piece, we have a number of treaties internationally and in Europe that suggest that you get to choose who you want to be with. But the likelihood that Ukraine is going to join NATO in the near term is not very likely, based on much more work they have to do in terms of democracy and a few other things going on there, and whether or not the major allies in the West would vote to bring Ukraine in right now. So there's room to work if he wants to do that. But I think, as usual, he's going to, well, I probably shouldn't go any further, but I think it will hurt him badly.
Right.
So what did you pick up from that?
Well, the pause at the end was very telling. He was already deciding that he was saying too much. But what's going on with Biden at the moment? Is there a good cop, bad cop thing going on between him and the State Department?
I'm not sure. I think Biden generally doesn't want to go to war with Russia, probably. Certainly at his age, I don't know if he could take the excitement of it all. But also, maybe he doesn't want to have that be his legacy, that he's the one who started a major conflict in Europe.
Yeah.
Or started World War III.
Right.
Not only that, who knows what compromising material there might be on his son Hunter for all the escapades in Ukraine over the years with Burisma. So who knows what's going on behind the scenes there. But the media attacked Biden roundly, both sides, left and right. Fox.
And so did Zelensky as well. He had some words to say about Biden's not being quite as vociferous about it as certain people would have liked.
Yeah, everybody rounded in on him. So This was interesting. This is a bipartisan effort to basically attack him for not being hawkish enough, not being warmongering enough. So he'll get his talking to by his advisors, and he'll probably come out in a more of a hard stance. But this could be the undoing of Joe Biden finally, is that he's not hawkish enough. So as we were commenting before the show, not much difference between Donald Trump and Joe Biden at the end of the day, right?
Right.
On Russia.
Right.
So let's look at what's really going on, though. Let's take a look at this here. And we've got a paradigm going here. We've got Russia on one side. We've got the U.S. and Britain and NATO and Ukraine on the other. Notice how I didn't include any other flags, Mike, because those are the only ones at the end of the day that really matter. So who's involved here? The war drums are beating pretty hard. Putin is there on your left-hand side, and there's Joe weighing in here, and here's mini-me coming up, Vladimir Zelensky, the new actor turned president of Ukraine. Yes, he was on a sitcom playing a president just a couple of years ago, and now he's actually president. Worked that one out. So I'm calling this Tonkin 2.0 because this is the situation we're in right now. We're going to help you sort of translate what you're hearing in terms of rhetoric. So when you hear this, when US, UK leading the chance with NATO, Russia is going to invade Ukraine. Now, do Russia have any plans to invade Ukraine? Is it in their interest to invade Ukraine?
Probably not.
I don't think so. Let's translate that for you. Now, here we're getting into 5D chess. Translation: NATO plans to draw Russia into eastern Ukraine to trigger all of the things that we'll show you in a moment here. So that's Tonkin 2.0. So what are the actual US-UK objectives here? What are they really after? And here's what they're after. This is the number one target. Believe it or not, it might not even be Russia. This is the number one target. Pull Germany away from Russia. Historically, this is going to be a major objective, definitely of Britain, historically, and the Western powers. They do not want to see good trade, good relations between Germany and Russia. They don't want that part of Europe facing eastward for a number of reasons. So this is why they're really rounding in on Olaf Scholz, the new Chancellor of Germany, trying to make him more hawkish, because Angela Merkel's position, if you remember, was a détente, was her policy. She started Nord Stream 2 with Putin. Okay, notice how she exited out of the scene recently, and now you're seeing all the war talk all of a sudden.
So the question is, did she exit out of the scene, or was she pushed, or was it, so in other words, has the West waited for her to go because it was her time, or was she really encouraged to it was time to move aside?
It's hard to tell. It could be either. It could be either. So that's what we're looking at here. So actual objective here is to stop the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, okay? That's the real objective I think, by ratcheting up tensions in Ukraine. And the US wants to sell its liquefied natural gas to Germany. So cut off the Russian gas, which is cheap and has unlimited supply, basically. And they can do long-term fixed contracts on prices that would stabilize the energy prices in Europe. No, the US wants to sell for twice the price bottled LNG over by shipping by boat.
And all fracked as well. So that the fracking industry in the United States has had rejuvenation with these high gas prices in the last few weeks and months.
Yeah, not exactly sustainable, is it? Someone call Greta and have her talk to Biden about that one and break the stalemate in Donbass. Look, nothing new has happened in Ukraine. Eastern Ukraine separated from Western Ukraine. It's been a stalemate for 7 years. The West and NATO are doing this right now. I'm telling you, my opinion is they want to break the stalemate. They want something to change. Now, what is that something going to be? It could be a Gulf of Tonkin 2.0 event. It could be a false flag. It could be an MH17 style event. Who knows? They've already set up the script right now. Russia is going to invade Ukraine. Pay close attention. Okay, here's another one. More sanctions on Russia. They want to cut them off from the international monetary system, cancel their SWIFT payment clearance access to US dollar transactions. That's also a major objective here. And disrupt China's Belt and Road. So that includes disrupting Germany's participation in the Belt and Road. And that's the most important part, because who's the number one economic power and manufacturer in the whole in Europe? It's Germany. Germany can service the Belt and Road market and service Western Europe and the US. That's how powerful Germany's industrial base is. Okay, so they want to put an end to that. So we saw this piece come up in the Times. This is serious. British anti-tank weapons are being sent to defend Ukraine from Russia. Now the question is, are these actual defensive weapons with a range of 800 meters taking out tanks? You have to be in close proximity, don't you, to fire off one of these? So are we really talking about defensive strategy here? Or are we talking about something else?
Good question. We may come on to a little bit of that later on.
So who's weighing in on this? Tobias Ellwood, chairman of the Defense Select Committee, said that President Putin is now simply waiting for the weather waiting for a break in the weather to invade. Work that one out. He's waiting for a winter. Basically, that a break in the weather means a snowstorm, apparently, right?
Well, no, a break in the weather, so good weather coming along, so because you need good weather to prosecute a war.
Well, no, on the soft ground in Ukraine, frozen underfoot land is better for tanks. Okay.
Okay.
So I think they're also intimating that actually it's waiting for a major harsh snow blizzard or something like this.
Okay.
So this might be the thing. Here's Tobias Ellwood, MP, Chairman of the Defense Committee. This is what he's saying. I hope other NATO countries quickly will follow our lead before the temperature drops and the freezing conditions make an invasion operationally possible, says Ellwood. And here's what I'm going to show now is the worrying part. This is what he said after that. We should brace ourselves. There's now a countdown to war. So he's talking about it like it's a fait accompli.
So look, we've got to remember what Tobias Ellwood is. He's obviously chairman of the Select Committee. He's obviously an MP, a backbench MP, but he's chairman of the Defence Select Committee. But he's also a reservist in 77 Brigade, and he has been pushing the anti-Russian narrative for how long? A decade at least. Pretty close ties to what was called Integrity Initiative. And so he was involved in all that. He's been pushing this anti-Russian propaganda for a long time. And so I believe he's absolutely enthusiastic for a war with Russia of some kind.
Yeah, and you also have to think, who's behind some of these people? Well, you've also got arms manufacturers, and this sort of stuff is just a showcase for arms sales. They've got Brimstone missiles going in there. They've got these new anti-tank, the British equivalent of the Javelin missile system and the U.S. TOW missile system. This is what they've got going in there. So it's kind of like showing it off on the global market. You know, it might not make that much of a difference in terms of if the war did break out. But so in that sense, it's a little bit encouraging that some of these are some of the tactics we've seen in the past. So we're hoping that it will, you know, maybe hopefully it's not as serious as we all fear. But so who is our foreign secretary in Britain?
This is a good question.
No one's seen him or her. Who is it?
Well, it's Liz Truss. So let's get her on screen here. And the reason she hasn't been seen the last few days is because she's in Australia. She's in Australia, and she was giving a speech to the Lowy Institute, and that's named after the Australian-Israeli businessman that set it up. And so she was talking about building a global network of liberty.
Really?
Yes, and this that was the title of her address. But let's just listen to a little bit of video from this speech that she gave.
The Kremlin haven't learnt the lessons of history. They dream of recreating the Soviet Union or a kind of greater Russia, carving up territory based on ethnicity and language. They claim they want stability while they work to threaten and destabilize others. We know what lies down that path and the terrible toll in lives lost and human suffering it brings. That's why we urge President Putin to desist and step back from Ukraine before he makes a massive strategic mistake. Ukraine is a proud country with a long history. They have known invading forces before, from the Mongols to the Tatars. They suffered through the state-sponsored famine. Their resilience runs deep. If they have to, Ukrainians will fight to defend their country. Invasion will only lead to a quagmire, as we know from the Soviet-Afghan War or the conflict in Chechnya.
So if you want to see, if you can put up with it, you want to see the whole speech, it's available on the Lowy Institute's YouTube channel. But so you mentioned Belt and Road, Patrick. She's also been at the first meeting of the AUKUS defense ministers, AUKUS foreign ministers meeting called AUKMIN. Now, you know, AUKUS is this UK, US, Australia defense pact. And so what they're saying is that UK and Australian ministers concluded vital defense and security talks today, actually, because obviously time zone differences and so on. And the discussions focused on key geopolitical challenges, including concerns around the situation in Ukraine. I'm not quite sure what Australia it's a close neighbor of Ukraine, as you can tell. So obviously Australia would be very concerned about what's going on in Ukraine.
They're probably concerned because there's a high rate of unvaccinated people in Ukraine, so you better mobilize the troops to maybe get them vaxxed. Who knows?
Yes.
With Australia, you never know.
Yes, but of course they're also talking about Indo-Pacific region, South China Sea, and of course China. And AUKUS is really about China and the Belt and Road. So again, we've got this narrative building up. We've got our two enemies, which we're attempting to. Okay, you're saying that there's a clear effort to draw Russia into Ukraine. There's also a clear effort, I think, to push Russia towards China in terms of their defense relationship. We've got to build this big nasty enemy because, of course, if we've got a big nasty enemy, we've got a burgeoning defense industry.
Yeah, we do, and certain people are more relevant than not in that sort of setup. So, and Liz Truss, she's very impressive. She makes Theresa May look really strong and stable.
Yeah.
So great work there. So let's go back to looking at the actual objectives here. The war drums are beating. What are the actual objectives here? And as you said, Mike, it's about this, keeping NATO relevant. So we need to balkanize these regions. We need to polarize the region. We need a new Cold War, maybe even a hot war, keeping NATO relevant. Otherwise, what happens in NATO? Well, it sort of withers away and dies.
As it has been. Suddenly it's rejuvenated, but it has been withering away for quite a number of years.
People start asking questions. Why are we spending all those billions of dollars on what and for who?
Yeah.
That's the question. So they're doing it right now. And here's the other one, arms sales, as we said. No surprise there. And this is a little bit of spite here, but revenge over Crimea. They are seething over the fact that Crimea reunited with Russia, and they constantly tell the public that Putin invaded Crimea and annexed it. Well, the military in Russia was already there in Sevastopol, so they can't invade themselves. And Crimea wasn't annexed, it was reunited in much the same way, and in a similar time frame that East Germany reunited with West Germany to become Germany, because as people who study history know, Crimea was separated from Russia because of something with Nikita Khrushchev in 1954, and he gave it to the Ukraine to curry favor with as the natives were getting restless during the Soviet satellite days. So it reunited, and they did a referendum, 95%. And by the way, according to international law, a number of international law scholars, what happened in Crimea is in line with international law. Why were there no outcries at the United Nations? How come countries didn't get together and decry this great injustice? Well, because pretty much it was in line with international law. So who can really argue with that? So going back here, and here's the other one, Mike, media and a political distraction from COVID and vaccine narrative meltdown. This is always going to be on the table, this situation with Russia. But when do they press the button? Now is an opportune time to press the button. You've got general strikes in France, leading NATO country. You've got a record unpopularity polls in the U.S. with the U.S. president. Boris Johnson isn't exactly bringing home the adulation right now, is he? So these governments, leading NATO states, Canada, are at record low popularity levels. So who knows, what do they need to sort of spice things up a bit? We'll continue on this. And here we go, a new war crisis to boost unpopular failing governments in the US, UK, France, and Canada. So now the concerning thing is here, and the reason people should be worried is you do have somebody in the White House that is not exactly playing with a full deck, okay? He is definitely past his golden years. He should be retired, but like Anthony Fauci and so many other people, he's still around and still running things. So Joe Biden's got a different idea of what NATO is and what Article 5 is, the Article 5 treaty. Let's listen to what Joe Biden's version of Article 5 NATO treaty sounds like. We've got this video from the press conference. Let's listen to this.
Like you're offering some way out here, some off-ramp, and it sounds like what it is at least an informal assurance that NATO is not going to take in Ukraine anytime in the next few decades, and it sounds like you're saying we would never put nuclear weapons there. He also wants us to move all of our nuclear weapons out of Europe and not have troops rotating through the old Soviet bloc. Do you think there's space for there as well?
No, there's not space for that. we won't permanently station, but the idea we're going to actually increase troop presence in Poland or Romania, et cetera, if in fact he moves. Because we have a sacred obligation in Article 5 to defend those countries. They are part of NATO. We don't have that obligation relative to Ukraine, although we have great concern about what happens in Ukraine.
Okay, you hear what he said. We have a sacred obligation to defend our partners in NATO Article 5.
Yes.
Okay? That's not what Article 5 says. Article 5 is if a member is attacked, that the other members will come to their defense. It's not about bolstering up and defending and putting in missiles and taking offensive or any kind of position in terms of these countries that are on the sort of the fringe of Russia, like Poland. So let's just take a look at what Article 5 says here with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. The parties agree that an armed attack against one or more of them in Europe or North America shall be considered an attack against them all. That's Article 5. No NATO member has ever attacked during the Cold War. It never had to use its military forces. The first one and the only time a NATO member was attacked and it was invoked was September 11th, 9/11. And that was quite dubious as well.
Yeah.
Because they attribute it to a state actor,
Yes.
to Afghanistan. And Afghanistan didn't actually attack the U.S. on 9/11. You can debate about who did it and why. That's another discussion. But here's where it gets dangerous. And so, by the way, this is from NATO's website. That's not what Joe Biden is saying.
Right.
So he's making up his own interpretation. The British officials are doing the same thing. The press does the same thing. All the boffins in the foreign policy blob do it too.
Remember, rapid response mechanism, that they got a common narrative. All the G7 countries signed up to that common narrative.
Companies, Freudian slip.
Absolutely, Freudian slip, yes.
So you're right, common narrative. So everyone's got to be singing from the same hymn sheet. This is where it gets dangerous, Mike. Re-examining NATO's Article 5, NATO's collective defense in times of cyber threats. So a, quote, Russian hack or an accused Russian hack could start a cyber war. Okay, this is the problem we're getting into. This is what historians called entangling alliances that led to some disasters like World War I. Okay, so this is serious stuff, and this is the reason why NATO is potentially a major hindrance, because it's all fine in your positioning for your contracts and everyone's getting rich and trying to rape and pillage economies like the Ukraine and using the people as cannon fodder. But then if things progress past a certain point where things are getting a little bit too tenuous and you've got nuclear powers involved, then who knows? Who knows what could trigger what? And this is the danger of it, and this is why we're trying to lay this out for everybody today, so they understand that we are not being told the truth by our elected officials in the West. They don't even understand what NATO is. They really probably has any scant idea of why it was founded and if it's still relevant today.
Right.
So
yeah, right. Well, look, let's come on to Ben Wallace then, because in the last few days he wrote an article. Now, I'm not aware that the article was published in any mainstream news outlets, but I just wanted to take some quotes from it and really sort of challenge some of the things that he said. So he began by saying, "I've lost count of how many times recently I've had to explain the meaning of the English term strawman to my European allies. That is because the best living, breathing straw man at the moment is the Kremlin's claim to be under threat from NATO." So, but Wallace is absolutely clear about this. The Kremlin's claim to be under threat from NATO is fake, false claim. An examination of the facts rapidly puts a match to the allegations against NATO. First, that NATO is at its core. NATO is at its core defensive in nature. So this is his claim. NATO is defensive. And of course, Article 5 is the claim. But strangely enough, today, NATO is making that claim as well. NATO is a defensive alliance. Our deployments are proportionate and in line with international commitments. In 2016, we enhanced our forward presence. We'll come on to that in a second. But I just want to challenge this somewhat. Ben Wallace claims it's defensive in one article, but in a speech a couple of years ago, he said, in the autumn, the Chief of the Defence Staff set out plans for how we will operate militarily through the integrated operating concept. This was Ben Wallace a couple of years ago. Let's just remind ourselves what the integrated operating concept is. The central idea of the integrated operating concept is offensive rather than defensive. So they can claim defensive with respect to NATO all they like, but the truth is that at a national level, there's been a change in orientation towards offensive. And you talked about cyber a second ago. They are the language from the UK's military establishment is we want to maintain conflict at a level which is below, what might lead to a kinetic war, is how they describe it. So offensive cyber attacks on Russia and on China, offensive attacks in the information war, and eventually offensive attacks militarily as well, but trying to keep them at a certain level. This is a dangerous game to be playing.
So that's straw man number one from Ben Wallace, that NATO is a defensive alliance.
Yes.
That's his straw man number one, right?
Correct. So here's his straw man number two. He went on to say, second, former Soviet states have not been expanded into by NATO, but joined at their own request. Well, is that true? I don't think it is. And in fact, if we look at the history of it, so here's from the National Security Archive, if you want to have a look at NATO expansion, what Gorbachev heard. And this is, it's talking about in the subhead there, declassified documents show security assurances against NATO expansion to Soviet leaders from Baker, Bush, Genscher, Kohl, Gates, Mitterrand, Thatcher, Hurd, Major, and Werner. Slavic Studies panel addresses who promised what to whom on NATO expansion. And they say the first concrete assurances by Western leaders on NATO began on January the 31st, 1990, when West German Foreign Minister Genscher opened the bidding with a major public speech in Bavaria on German unification. The US Embassy in Bonn informed Washington that Genscher made clear that the changes in Eastern Europe and the German unification process must not lead to an impairment of Soviet security threats. Therefore, NATO should rule out an expansion of territory towards the east. And then later on in the article, it says not once, but 3 times, James Baker tried out the not 1 inch eastward formula on Gorbachev in the February 9th, 1990 meeting. He agreed with Gorbachev's statement in response to the assurances that NATO expansion is unacceptable. Baker assured Gorbachev that neither the president nor I intend to extract any unilateral advantages from the processes that are taking place around German unification, that is, and that the US understood that not only for the Soviet Union, but for other Eastern countries as well, it's important to have guarantees that if the United States keeps its presence in Germany within the framework of NATO, not an inch of NATO's present military jurisdiction would spread in an Eastern direction. These promises were made time and time again. So that is Ben Wallace's second straw man. In fact, I'll go further. He lied. It's a complete misrepresentation of history. Let's look at the third straw man here. The allegation that NATO is seeking to encircle the Russian Federation is without foundation. So we talked about the enhanced forward, he mentioned the enhanced forward presence in that NATO tweet a little minute ago. Let's just look at it. So here we are, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland. This is the enhanced forward presence. And we've got UK troops, Denmark, France, and Iceland, and Estonia. We've got Germany, Belgium, Czech Republic, Iceland, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Norway, and Lithuania. We've got Canada, Albania, Czech Republic, Iceland, Italy, Montenegro, Poland, Slovakia, Slovenia, and Spain, and Latvia. And in Poland, we've got a huge United States contingent now, Croatia, Romania, and the United Kingdom, all right up against Russia's border. Okay, but it doesn't end there, because as we've been talking about over the last week or two, there are efforts to get Scandinavian countries to at least pretend to be joining NATO. This I think is probably more of a PR stunt than anything else, but it's designed.
Who are these 2 masked bandits here?
These 2 masked bandits, one is on the left, Ben Wallace,
Okay.
and on the right, that is the Finnish president, so whose name escapes me at the moment. But this is putting more and more pressure on Russia intentionally. And as if that wasn't enough, on Monday next week, Jens Stoltenberg is away off to visit the ministers of foreign affairs in Finland and Sweden. Why is he doing that? Is he doing that just for a cup of tea? Or is he doing that because he wants to build a narrative that that these countries are thinking about joining NATO, putting more and more pressure on Russia? Now, in order to prime then the UK public on this, we have for months now had constant bombardment from the mainstream press on this. Fears and fighting spirit of a nation in Kremlin crosshairs. Ian Burrell reports from inside Ukraine as experts warn Russian invasion is imminent, says the Mail. Here's another Mail. Vladimir Putin is plotting a full-scale invasion. British defense chiefs and White House warn Ukraine is facing a nightmare scenario as Russian troops mass along border and armored divisions head to Belarus. And, well, it got even worse, I think, on Wednesday afternoon, because 6 Russian landing ships sailed past Britain, sparking speculation they're bound for impending full-scale invasion. How many landing ships were there for, on D-Day, for example? What is Russia going to do with 6 landing ships? I don't think they're going to do very much.
About as much as Britain's going to do with its aircraft carrier that has no planes on it.
This is a good point. So, but my point is here that this constant bombardment of the British public with these types of headlines.
Yeah.
And
Ian Burrell, by the way, is one of the sort of top propagandists when it comes to international affairs. I mean, he is absolutely a safe pair of hands for the mainstream media and the deep state. So
yeah,
one of the special elite few.
So, we are in a pretty dangerous situation at the moment, Patrick. And, if the mainstream press is allowed to get away with these types of headlines, and if our politicians are allowed to get away with the types of rhetoric that they're pushing out, like Tobias Ellwood, for example, then I'm going to say to everybody, we haven't learned anything in the last 2 years. This government, the political establishment, the mainstream media, in the last 2 years of COVID have demonstrated that they are not worth their breaths, because they are pushing out lies constantly.
And you have all the defense ministers saying we're going to war, Russia's going to invade, and all this sort of stuff. The foreign ministers making these great statements, and the prime minister is involved in Partygate. Okay, and there's nothing on the front page of any of the newspapers that says we're about to go to war. They seem to be, Mike, planning it sort of by stealth under the surface, and all of a sudden they're going to spring something on us. I mean, what exactly is going on here? It's bizarre.
It is bizarre.